Get started.
Okay, beautiful. So an official welcome to everyone out there in the Zoom land. My name's Kat. I run the My Smart Garden program at Hobsons Bay City Council, and I'm joined by my colleague Hannah Camilleri, who also works for Hobsons Bay in a biodiversity role. We're just thrilled to be starting this program that we've been planning away for a couple of months to deliver. The most important job that I have this morning is just acknowledging the country that we're on today. And of course, we might be in some different places, but I think most people are in Hobsons Bay. So I want to acknowledge the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional custodians of the land, and also the waterways that make up Hobsons Bay, make up a very special part of this, this community. And by way of an overview of what's going to happen today, we have two presenters for you today that we're very excited about. We have Chiara and we also have Santia. And so Chiara's going to start off by telling us about her amazing and very inspirational local habitat garden and introducing you to some of the plants and the creatures that are part of that place. And then in the second part of the session, we have Santia from Greenjoy, who's going to be our landscape architect and is going to be coaching you through the process of designing your own habitat gardens. There will be time for questions, but we're actually going to hold them until the end of each of those presentations. So feel free to pop them in the chat window and we can kind of catch them at the end, or just hold on until the end of the presentations. Before we can actually jump into that, there's a little bit of housekeeping I need to go through with you just to make sure that we run this as smoothly as possible. And the first thing I just want to remind everyone of is that we are actually recording this session. And the active speaker, which is me right now with a yellow rectangle around my face, the active speaker will show up in the video. So if you ask a question verbally or you speak, you will actually appear in that recording. So if you don't want to appear, that's fine. Just turn your video off before speaking and use the chat window to ask questions as well. The other thing, as I just mentioned before, is please keep your microphones muted unless you're deliberately speaking. We will mute you if you don't mute yourself, and that just makes sure we don't have dogs and kids and any of the other chaos that might be happening in your homes coming into the audio feed. If you would like to change the name that's displayed publicly, you can do that by just heading over to the participants window, clicking on the More button next to your name and renaming yourself. I think that's most of the main stuff. So we'll just use that chat window for most of the questions, but if anyone's on a phone or isn't really good at typing, you can ask a verbal question. Just type VQ in the chat window, or you can raise your hand in Zoom using the buttons in the participants window if you know how to do that, and we can come to you and you can ask a verbal question if that's easier. And that will just make sure we have a smooth session, hopefully without too many people talking at the one time. So that's all the official stuff that I need to do this morning. And I'm just going to hand over to Hannah to talk a little bit about the rationale behind this project and why we've decided to run this in Hobsons Bay.
All right, so good morning everyone. I'm Hannah, the Biodiversity Officer at Hobsons Bay. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to this exciting program, Habitat Gardens in Hobsons Bay. So Habitat Gardens are important for increasing the biodiversity and also creating corridors or links for native wildlife to move across the municipality. By including indigenous plants into your gardens, you can attract native birds, amphibians, reptiles and insects, as they're now provided with habitat. Indigenous plants are already suited to the local environment, and they work well in our gardens as they've already adapted to our soil types and our climatic conditions of the area. So by including these native plants into your habitats, whether it is your private gardens or possibly even your nature strips, you're providing a stepping stone for wildlife to move across the urbanised landscape that we're in, and it in turn creates connectivity with conservation reserves. So the major aim of this program is just to assist our community in creating those habitat gardens within their private properties by using indigenous plants, so incorporating those indigenous plants to attract those wildlife, but also creating those safe stepping stones that allow the wildlife to move amongst the municipality and connect to conservation reserves, whilst also increasing the biodiversity within Hobsons Bay. So that's just a little recap of what the program is about, why it's important to include Indigenous and local species into our garden. And now I would like to just give you a bit of an introduction to our first presenter, Chiara. So Chiara Perry by trade is a qualified dog trainer, and she also provides behavioural consultations for dogs with anxiety and aggression. But today she's going to be talking to us about the importance of habitat gardens. So she's going to talk about different habitat gardens that you can create. She wants to talk to us a bit about the wildlife that you can attract and what she's attracted to her property, and also the experience of creating and developing a habitat garden. So Kiara was one of the first participants in the Wyndham series of Habitat Heroes, and she's been enhancing her garden for the last 10 to 15 years. She brings great enthusiasm, I should say, and passion, and she's got such an inspirational habitat garden, and she's great with supporting native wildlife and establishing household gardens with those indigenous plants. And as Kat mentioned, we're just going to hold questions till the end. You can write them in that comment section, or you can raise your hand, or I think it is QV, is that right? If you have a question, Kat, I'm not sure on the exact technicality, if you want any questions, but we've got a time at the end of this session to ask questions for Kiara. So I'll open up now to Kiara to share her screen and start the presentation.
Thank you. And there we are. Bear with me. Okay. Welcome everybody. Thank you for attending today. And today the weather couldn't be even more perfect actually, because this is really what we need to sort of get us out there and start plotting what we're going to do and what changes we can make. As Hannah mentioned, this gardening thing that I've been doing, this journey that I've been on, is definitely not my profession. It is a hobby and it's a bit of a passion. I've been into the whole wildlife native stuff from as far as I can remember. And I'm actually a first generation Australian, so it's not like I've been, you know, born and bred, and all my generations have as well. My parents are Italian, so they have no idea about native stuff, but it's something that just appealed to me right from the get-go. And as soon as I had the opportunity with a brand new house block, it was like an open canvas for me. So it was just a brilliant experience. I have learned a lot through trial and error. So what I have done is not, again, because I'm qualified, it literally was by sticking things in, seeing what survived, and then learning the hard way, unfortunately. So the aim of this program is to make that easier for you. So you don't have to trial and error for 10 years, but you can actually get it right in 1 year. So here's how we sort of present it. And this is also how you can do it in stages. You can't do it all in one go, it's impossible. So that's what I'm going to be showing you today, is how to get about there. All right, so the important reasons, as Hannah already mentioned, it encourages the native wildlife, and they were here already to begin with, but because we have sort of removed some of their environment, they've had to make do and move out. So the idea is to bring them all back in, and it's so easy because within 12 months of my first few plants being in, when I first started gardening in my block, I had birds coming straight away, and I had geckos coming straight away. So it doesn't take long for them to make their way back once the environment's there. The genetic diversity is really important. We have to create these corridors so they can get from A to B, so that they can breathe, they can move, and then we have got a better gene pool. It makes the whole environment look so much better. It makes the suburb look much nicer. It's nice to see green as you're driving into your suburb, as opposed to just rooftops. And it just makes it look natural, as opposed to being sort of very artificial and synthetic, which is where a lot of gardens unfortunately are heading into this at the moment with the artificial turf. And I think it's actually very calming. I could sit out in the garden with a cuppa, and it's just so nice to just watch the birds coming in, and they're making it so much more pleasant. So it's just a lovely experience. The benefits again are the habitats. We also have less weeds, so our plants are really good at what they do, especially the indigenous plants. So we have a lot less weeds. There's a lot less watering involved because they're adapted to the low rainfall. My house does not have air conditioning, and my house is cool throughout the summer purely because I've got a lot of trees and green foliage that's going around it that just blocks out a lot of that horrible heat. And the soil gets really quite healthy because you've got all the roots doing their job as well, and the worms come on board, and we get the whole ecosystem even under the ground improving. So we don't have that horrible clay soil that a lot of people have, or just that really sandy soil. All right, so these are some of the critters that you can start to attract into your gardens. These animals have been, so the lizard's my pet. I've had partlets, I've had the heron. The moths are starting to make their way in. So, and I've got the frogs, I've got them all coming, and it's just purely because I've created the environment for them. And then they made their way through. So this is what you're hopefully going to be inspired by, that you can get all these little critters coming into your home, both day and night, because some of them you can only see at night time, but it's amazing what you can find with a torch. You go out into your backyard and you'll start spotting geckos without even trying. All right. So just so everybody understands, as the developments have grown, our habitats have been reduced. So it has been, a part of it has been to do with development, but we actually can make a difference. We can start making these pockets again, and we can start joining all those dots till we bring it all back on board. So it's not all just doom and gloom. There's actually a massive amount that you can actually make, a big impact. This is sort of what suburbia is looking like at the moment in some areas. And obviously the artificial turf is a bit of an environmental disaster because it compacts the soil as well. That's what my garden looked like, well, in the early 2000s. So that's the very, very beginning. I started off with just dirt, and I had to put down grass because otherwise I had dirt in the house and I had young children. So that was the very, very, very beginning. And then that's what we have now. So I don't have any spaces left in my garden where I could stick another plant in. So I'm looking for projects now because I've got no gaps left, and I've even done my nature strip. But because I have filled up all these spaces, it attracts so much. They've got refuge, they've got food, they've got access to spaces that they can feel comfortable in. And every year I get something different. So it really excites me all the time. That's another section at the moment that's in full flower right now. And this is what it looks like at the moment. And there's actually 2 frog bogs in there as well. So I've got ponds, I've actually got 7 ponds, and I've got plants all around, all the way through, shrubs and everything. And I've chosen plants that will flower at different times of the year so that I mix the birds that come as well. So there's not a period where I don't have something blooming. So that's again another image of what it used to look like. That's just grass, just grass. And that's what that section looks like now. So I've got another pond in there, which is usually full of tadpoles, full of frogs, and there's chocolate lilies in there, native grasses. There's a lot of plants, and you can see in the background I've also got fruit trees. So it doesn't have to be just indigenous. You can still incorporate it into what you may already have existing. You can create the top permaculture garden. I do have my veggie patch and I do have my fruit trees, and it all works quite well. And interestingly, the birds that come through, the native birds, actually are the parasite controllers. So I don't use any sprays or chemicals because the birds do that for me, and they don't eat my fruit. So it's really quite useful. My garden has evolved dramatically. So when I first moved to Point Cook, I had young children. I had a 12-month-old and I had a 4.5-year-old. So I had to adapt it to what their needs were as well. So initially the garden was a bit incorporated with the native plants, but I also made it a fun playground for them, very sensory for them. And as they got older and they required less and less use of the yard, the grass started to get chopped out and it started to become more what it is now. So I have no turf at all in my yard at all, front yard nature strip included. There are only ground covers, trees, shrubs, plants. So I removed the grass as soon as my children were past that stage of wanting to access any. And it doesn't matter how big or small your space is, you can create vertical native gardens. So it doesn't have to be like a whole backyard. You can just create little corners. And in fact, my backyard is little pockets that I have slowly joined up. So it wasn't one massive project. I started with one bit with what I could afford, and then I gradually started to continue along. So you can even work in little courtyards. You can create gardens that are more vertical. We have a lot of beautiful Australian native climbers. And you can do really well with pots as well. So a lot of our native wildflowers love to be in pots. So there's so many options. It's not just for big spaces. My suburban house block as well, by the way, is just an average house block. It's not on acreage, it's just on a normal house block in Point Cook. And we can get the kids involved. My daughter built the decking. Most of the decking that's around the yard, around the plants, she built it herself. I gave her the tools, I showed her what to do, and off she went. So you can get the kids involved, and that they grow up with that nice yearning for nature as well. And they, even as they mature, even when they think it's a bit daggy, you can't get it out of them. It's there. So they'll still be able to go, oh, that's one of these and that's one of those. And then we can get something that really can create a habitat that really just adapts to anybody. Anybody will appeal to it. And we do get the whole family involved. So it's a lovely part of it. Okay, so this is something that Sancho's going to talk to you about, but this will just get you sort of the juices flowing, thinking about what kind of layout you want. But it's really important that you start working out what do you look out of your windows? What do you see when you look out your windows? And they're the areas you start focusing on, because there's no point creating a garden if you can't see it through your windows. So Sancha will work with this with you when she starts creating her little backyard maps for you, or your front maps. But this is something to get you thinking. Okay, look at where you spend the most part of your day. Have a look at where the sun goes up, sun goes down. So you've already got those questions ready for Sancha to then fine tune. And also make sure it's affordable. We've got to work with what we can afford. And the beauty of things like little tube stocks, they're cheap, but they grow fast. Scaling is really important. So let's make sure that we don't put our big trees right at the front. We put our low shrubs at the front, as I said, closer to the house, and then we gradually scale it back. So we want the taller trees and shrubs towards the fence line, so that way we're not blocking the view, and that scaling looks really quite nice. Be mindful of neighbours as well. If you are putting in shrubs or trees that are going to lose a lot of leaves, if your neighbours aren't happy about leaves, you may have to look at what plant choices you're going to make. I'm lucky that I live on a corner, so the majority of my block is not butted up with a neighbour. So my bigger trees and my leaf shedding trees are all on my nature strip, so it has no impact on anybody. Just touching again on the difference between Indigenous and native. Native means they are found in Australia, but Indigenous means they are found specifically within your zone. And that means they've adapted to the soil that's in your area, and they've adapted to the lower climate, rainfall, the stronger winds. We also get the saltier winds, especially down in Hobsons. So that's the other benefit of the Indigenous plants. About 80% of my garden is Indigenous, and I have not lost plants probably in about 10 years. I've made better choices in the last 10 years now that I have a better understanding of it. And if anything, I have to keep bringing things back a little bit because they grow so beautifully. And the animals that are in your area are also adapted to what's supposed to grow within your zone. So it is important that you try to stick to Indigenous as much as you can. In particular, if you're looking at creating ponds and little water sections, because the plants, if they are not Indigenous, they actually can be quite invasive, and they are regarded as a weed. So just look into the Indigenous over just the native. All right, so we'll start looking at how we can bring in birds. We need to make sure, obviously, we've got trees with various heights and textures, because some birds like to be much higher, some birds prefer to be down low in the shrubbery. Majority of our birds are either nectar eaters or insect eaters, so we want to provide them with plants that produce a lot of blossoms that actually have nectar in them that they can eat, and also having some dense shrubbery so the birds can nest. So birds like New Holland honeyeaters are very, very predated on, especially by birds like Indian miners. They appreciate having dense shrubbery to put their nest in because then they can't get targeted. They need water obviously every day, and we need to make sure that they're safe from predators. Cats as well are one of their biggest nemesis, unfortunately. So these are some pictures of some grevilleas. They flower all year round. They come in all different colours. They produce nectar all the time. These, for me, are what brings the birds in all the time. So I've got a variety of grevillea that will encourage the birds to come all the time. I've got quite a few populations of New Hollands and also wattle birds that are permanent residents. They don't move. They've got all they need here all year round. They bring a lot of colour. It's beautiful. The eucalypts are also really important because they've got the blossoms, but also the bark plays a big role. So often they pick the bark off and they eat the little bugs that are underneath. On the leaves, we have what's called lerps, which are little bugs that sit in the leaves as well. And that will attract birds like your spotted pardalets. So it's important that we've got a good variety. Geckos as well. If you do have any bark shedding type of tree, you'll find geckos actually will live in the layers. And I could easily walk out at night with a torch, move over a little bit of bark, and there'll be a gecko there just looking at me. So it's quite amazing what will live just behind bark. These are some of the vertical creepers that you can consider, especially if you've got a smaller space. So one of them is a native jasmine. So it's actually an Australian jasmine, beautiful perfume that it produces. And that is like a hotel for my New Holland honeyeaters that come on board, full of nests all year round. And on the other side there's what's called a running postman. And generally it's found crawling on the ground, but it grows vertically quite easily and produces these beautiful little red flowers. Little superb fairy wrens find that one as a ripper for nesting in. So it's another one that you can grow upright on a trellis and you'll find the birds will come in, as well as insects. Praying mantis love that plant as well. And then you start seeing these little guys, which just make you melt when you start seeing the little nests being built. You see little babies, and then they fledge, and then off they go, and they just stay. So they become so accustomed to seeing us that they're also not even frightened. They quite happily were quite inquisitive when they see us in the garden. Water, crucial for the birds. So they get thirsty very easily. They get very hot very easily in the summer. They can die very easily if the temperature goes over 35. So it's important they've always got access to birds. They bathe very regularly because that's their parasite control. So it's important they can get in as well to wash themselves. I have a rock in the middle of every one of my water dishes because the birds like to land on something first, jump in, have a flutter, and then jump out. So they don't feel safe to just jump into a big dish. So just make sure you've always got something like a rock or even just a little branch that goes in. In the evenings, I have anywhere up to 20 to 30 New Holland honeyeaters coming in for their regular bath, and they make a racket and they empty that water dish, and the rainbow lorries come every morning. So it's, you know, sit that as well in a space in your home where you can see that out of your window. It's awesome entertainment just watching those birds coming in for their bath. You get to know them quite well. And these are some of the birds that will come. So these are birds that have been in my garden. Just this is my garden in Point Cook, just because I've created the habitat for them. I do get the cuckoos. I've had 3 out of the 4 that I've found in the area. I get silver eyes. I've had kingfishers roll up. The fairy wrens come in seasonally and they nest, which is just beautiful. And I've also had the lorikeets of various types. Crested pigeons are making a massive comeback, so we're seeing more and more of those. And I'm getting the different various fantails as well. So I've recorded roughly about 26 different bird species that have been in my yard over the last 10 years in particular. And every year I get another one. Every year there's something new that surprises me. So I'm looking forward to what I get the next year. Alrighty, so we can start looking at how we can bring in frogs. Again, I sort of love all of them. I love everything. There's not a particular species that I prefer over another. So I just want to bring everything that I can into my garden. Frogs are another thing, and I think it's quite comforting when you hear frogs croaking and talking through the night or in the evening, especially in summer. This little one here that you can see is actually a tree frog, and they make their way occasionally when we have big storms. They will find their way into your garden. I had this little one in particular that lived in my garden, completely free to come and go if it wanted to, and it stayed there for about 7 years. And I suspect it passed away from old age in the end because it just suddenly was getting slower and slower. And it could come if it wanted to, come and go. And it lived all the time. Every night without fail, it would sit on the water dish, eat the bugs, and then go back to bed in a little hollow log. So we can attract them. I've created quite a few ponds. I've got about 7 ponds all up from memory. You need to find a spot that's got partial sun, not full sun, because the water will get too hot. We also don't want it in too much shade or they won't lay eggs. So they need a little bit of sun to keep that water just at that right temperature. You need to decide whether you want to dig it down or whether you want to build it up. Either will work. If you don't want to dig, you don't have to. And the example at the top is exactly that. I got to the point where I couldn't dig anymore. There's not so much my back can tolerate. So I decided to build that pond up. And what I did was just created a frame, popped the pond in it, backfilled it, done. And that one sits in my front. And then I've got others scattered throughout my backyard, and they all are different. I did start off with a liner, but I found with a liner the roots, the trees perforating it, and I just kept losing too much water. So I did start opting for more of your prefabricated type of molds, like what you can get from Bunnings. The deeper ones are the ones that I've found where the frogs are laying their eggs, because they like a little bit of depth. So you do have to make sure you comply with the council rules. Mine are not just water. I have a lot of substrate in them. So I have dirt in there, I've got plants in there, I've got rocks in there, and then I've done the same all the way around, because the frogs don't actually spend most of their time in the water. They spend it out of the water. You don't need pumps and filters. They don't like that. They like still water. So there's no need to worry about going out to buy any type of pump system. They just want nice, clean water. And with the plants, they will act as your filter. So you don't have to do anything about the water. The plants will do it for you. Again, I need to stress that we need to look at indigenous plants for ponds, because otherwise they can become invasive. So we want to make sure we're picking the right ones from the right nursery. Frogs are also quite poor swimmers, so a lot of people don't realise that, and they will drown if they can't get out. So you need to make sure you've got ledges and branches going in so they can hop on there and come out when they need to, because they're not designed to just hop out of water. They can't do that. So that's what I use now predominantly. I've used majority of those just because I know it cannot be perforated. It tends to hold the water really, really well, and I can just plant it right up as I like. I can create ledges. You can also use bathtubs. So if someone's throwing out a bathtub, you can also use one of those. Even a clamshell will work. So it doesn't have to be something you need to go and buy. And often on even Marketplace and Gumtree, you'd be amazed what you can find, sometimes even for free. So just go look around. Rocks are really important. Again, you can often find people are getting rid of rocks and they advertise it all the time for free. And I've been collecting rocks for years now. I have a bit of a rock addiction. Popping those around your frog box will create a lot of these really damp pockets underneath. And that's often where the frogs will hide throughout the day. And then they'll hop into the water at night when they want to feed, and they hop into the water at night when they want to lay their eggs, usually after a heavy rainfall. So pop your rocks so you can make them look quite natural. They don't have to be sort of laid out strategic, sort of like in some pathway form. It can be just a natural, just plopping rocks here and there. You can pop plants in there as well to make them even more green. But in there, just next to the rocks, is another frog bog, and that's, yeah, they spend their time in and out of those spaces. And these are the kind of frogs that you'll get within the Hobsons Bay area. So you will get the pobblebonks, you'll get the brown tree frogs, which sound like a bird at night time. People often mistake they call for a bird, it's actually a tree frog. The spotted marsh you'll get, and you'll get the striped marsh as well. And I'll just play a little recording of what the spotted one sounds like. So just listen to this. Let me just bring the volume up. You can hear that. So they're the frogs that live in that pond right there. In amongst all that green, there's one pond, and you've got those frogs that are just going off. So they're the spotted marsh. So it sounds like a tennis match, just so you know, if you're wondering what that noise is at night time. It can be a little bit deafening when you've got 50 or 100 of them, so you do have to be aware of that. But it dies down. They do stop. Oh, all right, I'll move on. All right, and that's the tree frog again, sitting in there. I've actually had 3 all up. I had 2 more that appeared last year, 2 others that just came randomly. So they will make their way. I have not gone to collect them. They've made their way into your garden. So you don't go buy them. You don't have to go and scour them from other places. They will make their way if you provide the environment. They just need it. Alrighty, so we can look at reptiles. And when I'm talking reptiles, I'm not talking snakes. I'm talking blue-tongued lizards, geckos, skinks, little dragons. I personally have never had a snake in my garden, and it is landscaped from one end to the other. What snakes do love though is messy. They like messy, where you've got piles of wood and debris lying around and grass that's sort of elbow high. That's what they tend to like. So if you've got a native or an indigenous garden and it's sort of reasonably in order, you won't get those snakes coming through. They don't like it because they're too vulnerable. Your blue tongues will like that. Geckos will love it. Your little skinks, your garden skinks will love it. You may even get little Jackie dragons, and you'll just start to get these lizards coming through. So that's what we're trying to attract. This one's one of mine. He's actually my pet one. I've got a couple of pet lizards, and then I do have the occasional one that happens to traffic through the front yard. They just make their way up and down the street occasionally. Geckos, I have lost count. I find them inside my house now. I find them everywhere at night. They're on my windows, they're on the walls. It's awesome watching the geckos through the night. They're very, very busy little critters. So what we need for our reptiles, if we're trying to encourage the blue tongues to come through and the skinks and the lizards, we want to have some nice flat rocks, because they need that to help warm themselves up. They are thermal regulated, so they don't have a system like ours. They rely on heat, like a battery charger. They have to have a bit of a gap underneath the rock so they can retreat there if they feel vulnerable. And also when it gets too hot, they can't cope. So they will go under the rock to just continue to keep warm, but not overheat. And they are predated on. I'm one of the call people for lizards when they get harmed by cats and dogs. One of the vets often calls me to rehabilitate them and then re-release if necessary. They are very easily predated on, unfortunately. And the other problem they have is lawnmowers. They often are in the grasses and people don't realise that they're there and they mow over them. So be aware when you're mowing to just do a little check if you do happen to know that there's a resident bluey running around. And also just watching out when you're gardening, that if you see it, don't be alarmed and think immediately it might be a snake. Have a little look first and see whether you do notice the legs and the little ears, and then you'll realise that it's a blue tongue. They are harmless. If you do try to pick one up and you're not experienced, they can bite you, and for every reason. So just leave them alone and just admire them and just watch where they go. Alrighty. They like grasses as well. So especially skinks and legless lizards thrive on our grasses. So it's important that we've got those for them to continue to survive on. Geckos in particular prefer grasses as their nesting ground. They actually will lay communal nests around the base of a lot of your native grasses. So if you've got those, you may find that there's little eggs lying around and these little geckos will hatch out. The vegetation is also soft, so it's not gonna hurt them in any way. They will just move their way through. They can hide underneath it very easily. So it's a really nice plant to have, plant variety to have in your garden, so that it really encourages those kind of species in as well. Water dishes as well, critical for lizards. Lizards get extremely thirsty. They get especially thirsty when they are shedding their skin. So they need to have access to water a lot. We need to make sure, again, the water dishes are not in a space where there's cats and dogs, otherwise they will be easily predated on. So we want to have those dishes in an area where they can just go there, have a drink and move on. It's not uncommon that you find even sometimes lizards coming in for a drink at a dog's water bowl, especially through summer. So have one maybe sitting in your front yard. So if they are trekking through, they can have a drink and they'll go, and they don't forget where the dishes are, so they will remember it and they'll make their way there quite regularly. So I've got quite a few different dishes for them because some of them like it a little bit deeper. My water dragon likes to submerge herself completely, so she lives in the pond now. And when she wants to shed skin, she goes into this dish in particular because it's smaller, and then she could scratch all her skin off. And I find even the other blue tongues, they have particular dishes that they prefer at certain times of the year. And here are our little geckos. These guys are just little beauties. They are so cute. They actually also make little noises. I don't know if anyone's ever heard geckos, but they actually make a little bark. And if they're fighting, they sometimes have a little squabble, and you'll hear them actually making these little weird yip noises out in your garden. Yeah, I said I've lost count as to where they are. Now I believe that there is a little video, and hopefully you might be able to see that. So that's a little baby gecko that I found just before winter hit. And they're back out already again. And you find them stuck on the walls and stuck on the windows. We just say hi to them and off it goes. They are so easy to find, and you'll have them in your garden without doubt if the habitat's there. Oh. Let's move on. And there's my Darren, my beautiful Darren, who I've actually had now for 20 plus years. So he's one of my pet blue tons, and they live long. So he's well and truly over 20 years. Okay, let's start looking at insects. So in the last probably 3 years, I've started to shift my garden a little bit. There's some sections that I've redone, and I'm starting to now try to attract more of the insects. I've had blue-banded bees appear in my garden in the last few years, and these are just absolutely to die for. When they come into your yard, it's like you've hit gold. And I'm starting to see more and more little moths and butterflies, and I'm trying to now bring them into the garden as well. They all play a massive role. Even just this morning, just going outside, I can see a lot of little hoverflies are starting to come in. So this is where they start looking for the habitats because they want to pollinate, and they are important for that area in particular with the pollination. So this is what we're trying to attract. And I know for a fact that in Altona in particular, the population of some of these moths are making a comeback because there has been a big planting of native grasses that they particularly require. So we are seeing more and more of these, and that's just purely because the humans have actually started to have an impact in a positive way. We've only got less than 1.1% of our native habitat in the volcanic plains. That's what's left, but we need to bring that back. Okay, so the population of the insects in particular is what's taken the biggest toll. And without the insects, we don't get the pollination. Without the insects, we don't get the food supplies for the omnivores. So we've got to get that balance back. And I definitely have noticed, as I said, in the last couple of years, the numbers are increasing dramatically. So I'm looking forward to what happens this year now that I've planted a lot more of the wildflowers. Again, these are some of your little butterflies, which they should start to appear soon. They need the plants to lay their eggs on. The caterpillars need the plants to eat so that they can then progress to morphosizing into a butterfly. They need that environment or they can't continue their process. And we've got these little guys as well. I'm seeing more and more the cobalt wasp. I see those all the time now. They're magnificent looking, scary looking, magnificent looking, because their blue is just really iridescent. The orchid wasp, without the orchid wasp, we wouldn't have orchids. They specifically are for orchids to actually pollinate them, our native orchids. So play a massive role. And again, with your moths, really, really critical to this area. This is where they're from. So we've got to get them coming back again. These are the wildflowers. So I've started putting in a lot of these now, and I've got one section that I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens over this spring. Bills and little milky beauty heads. You can also get a lemon version of the beauty heads that has lemon scent. These are all indigenous plants. They should be everywhere throughout the whole western side of Victoria. And there's very small pockets of those now. You'll be lucky to find these growing naturally. The basalt daisies are critical as well. And, you know, if you're more into sort of the cottage style garden, these are the plants that you can incorporate that are actually indigenous. So it doesn't have to look like just a native bush, but it can actually look like a native garden. My neighbour 2 doors up, after many years, gave in. Her front yard was just going nowhere. Her grass was just becoming invasive, and she decided to come to one of my workshops. And her front yard has been transformed. She wanted a cottage style garden, and she's put all these plants in her front, and it's amazing how it's changed literally within 8 months. So she's now got plants that are self-propagating. The seeds are producing more plants. She's doing not much weeding at all, and she finds that physically quite challenging as well. And she's just wrapped. And now that's become contagious. Another neighbour has done the same, and her front yard has transformed. So you can create these lovely little cottage gardens as well. And these grow really well in pots. So they're beautiful in pots. And there's some more here. The native buttercups, mine have come up this year beautifully. The blue devils are, again, really, really indigenous to our area. The little bindi weeds, they offer a lot of variety in colour. So you can have a palette of certain colours, or you can have a bit of a blend. And most of these will all tend to flower roughly around the same time. So they really maximise the appeal for the insects to come through. And there's some more examples. So we've got our drumsticks, our clustered everlasting, the little pussy tails at the top will pop up soon, and also your drumsticks. So if you've got a bit of a yellow palette, you can incorporate that. And a lot of these will actually self-propagate. So what that means is that there's seeds that will be pushed out once they finish flowering, will actually come back on their own. So you don't have to continue to buy plants. A lot of our native plants are designed in such a way that when they seed, you just have to let them do their job, and they will just self-propagate. They'll continue to come up. There's quite a lot of times that I'll actually dig a few of mine up, and I'll pop them and I'll move them, or I'll even give them away because I've got so many. So it's actually quite cost effective. And then just touching on the blue banded bees, because they are another one of my more recent favourites. They're harmless, so if anyone is concerned about bees or allergic to bees, there's nothing to worry about. They don't have a sting, so they're stingless, they're harmless. They don't live in hives and swarms. They actually are very solitary, and they basically just go from flower to flower, loading up their little legs with pollen and just doing their job pollinating the flowers. They hum, so when you hear them in your garden, you'll know, because it doesn't sound like a European bee. They have a hum, and it's the first thing that draws your attention. And they are quite erratic, and you see them buzzing around, but you can't miss that blue bottom. They are spectacular, and when you start getting them in your garden, it's like you've had Christmas. For me, it's just beautiful. I have now got populations of bees increasing every year, and last year I had well and truly over a dozen, whereas 2 to 3 years ago I had 1. So it's really nice that they all come through. If you are trying to attract blue banded bees, plant flowers that produce purple colour. That's their favourites. They tend to love purple. In particular, the Dianella is one of their most favourites. That's their main go-to. However, they will also go on any of the lilies, the purple lilies, kangaroo apple. They go on the blue devils. They even like the flowers in my sage from my herb garden. And they do actually also like tomato flowers. So that's another one that you'll find them on. They are just a beautiful little bee, and these are the flowers that you can use to attract them. So anything that's purple coloured will bring in the blue banded bees, and you'll admire them. They do appear when it's warm. So as soon as you get the warmer weather, so they start to probably come in the next 2 months, and they'll hang around until the warm weather starts to ease off, and then they'll head back up north. So they are seasonal. This is the kind of environment bees like to shelter in. So again, they don't create hives. They like to go into these, what we call bee hotels. They're fabulous little do-it-yourself projects. They like to wedge themselves into the little gaps. So you can just use bamboo sticks from the garden, cut them up at different lengths, pop them into like a little box that you've created and pop that in your garden somewhere. And even the wasps will actually take residence in those little gaps. So that's what will actually appeal to your blue-banded bees and wasps and some of the insects that prefer burrowing into tight spaces. Fun project for the kids too. Alrighty, so if everybody, and I've just mentioned again here, if everybody actually makes a little bit of effort, we all actually can create these beautiful corridors. And as I've said, I've already got 2 neighbours in not far from me that have already become a little bit caught up in this and have transformed their gardens. And it's very easy now for birds to make their way from one neighbour to my yard to the other yard. So it means that they're using a lot less energy expenditure to try to get from A to B to just get some food or water or resources. And that makes it so much easier for them. So we can create these habitats. I still have my children's cubby house. It's become my garden shed. So I've incorporated that into the garden. We've got decks that go through so I can move around and step around. I've got rocks and I've got a lot of branches on the ground to make it look as natural. It doesn't have to look bushy. If you don't want it to look like a bush, you can have it a lot more orderly. This is what appeals to me. So I look like I'm walking through my little bit of bush. And it is just my little urban backyard in Point Cook. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kiara. That was incredibly inspiring, and I've taken 2 pages of notes. So we've got lots and lots of questions that I'm going to rapid fire at you if that's okay. So welcome back, everyone. We hope you enjoyed that quite beautiful, incredible presentation from Kiara, and you're feeling all inspired and motivated to set up something similar at home. Before I introduce Sanchia, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the rest of the session and the workshop too that is coming up. So what will happen in the next session is we're actually going to have you in small groups. And so you're going to be doing a design task using whatever space you've decided for your habitat gardens. And in the second workshop, you'll be in small groups of about 5 people, and you're going to have about 10 minutes each to discuss your design with Sanchia and also learn from each other as well. And to try and make that session of most benefit to you, we're going to attempt to put you in some groups with similar spaces and similar goals for your garden. So the goal is better than random. So at the end of this session, or at least in the next day or 2, we'll have a short 4-question survey that just asks you what type of garden you're planning to design, what scale it is, and that will just help us sort you into those groups. And the other thing I want to say before Sanchia starts is that one of the first things to do when you're doing a design is create some kind of a base map, which is like your blank canvas on paper that will help you organise all your design ideas. And Sanchia is going to take you through a little bit of how to do that. But I just wanted to mention that one of the things I can offer you working for council is a high quality overhead photograph of your property, which sometimes is a bit of a shortcut to creating a base map. So I thought I would just share with you an example of my place and what that might look like. So this is the sort of level that we can get to quite easily, and that means you can just trace your property boundary, maybe trace the house outline, and then you'll see even some of the major trees that are in your property as well. So if anyone's a little bit intimidated by the idea of drawing a base map that's relatively to scale, don't worry, we can help you out with that and send you those photographs. But we'll only do that, of course, if you ask us to. So that's one of the questions that you'll come up across in the survey. Okay, so I think that's everything I need to say. So I'll like to introduce Sanchia from Green Joy. Sanchia is a gardener and a landscape designer. In 2017, she founded Green Joy and has designed gardens, rooftops, public parks and installations. She embraces a pluralistic approach to gardening where edible, ecological and ornamental intentions happily coexist. For the past 3 years, she's been a design consultant on the Wyndham Habitat Hero program. And in a nutshell, she's all about bringing people together and connecting people with nature. So I'm so looking forward to your presentation, Sanchia. Welcome, and over to you.
Hello, thank you. I'm Sanchia, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm standing on today, that of the Boonwurrung people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm your garden design coach, and today I'm going to strip you all of your preconceived ideas that design is an ephemeral, artsy-fartsy thing that some people have and others don't. You are all here because you love being in the garden, and design is just about giving yourself time to think about where you're going to put the plants before you pick them up. Now, I've introduced myself as your coach because I want you to understand that designing a garden is a process. There are 4 steps that you take to design a garden, and I'm going to show you how to do it. After this session, you will know what to do before you pick up the plants. You'll have 2 weeks until we meet again, and when we do meet for the second workshop, I want you to have in your hand a simple sketch of your habitat garden, an idea of the plants you want to put in, and we will break into small groups and you'll have a chat to me and your fellow gardeners about your design ideas. We will give you feedback and celebrate your brilliance. So let's go through the steps. And screen. Okay, so first step is the warm up. So stretching your design muscles and getting into the zone. So let's change into our active wear. We are in lockdown. You're allowed 1 hour out of your home and you have a 5-kilometre radius to explore. This is perfect. I want you to go for a walk around your neighbourhood or just down your street. I want you to look at what's thriving in gardens, parks, on the roadside. These are the plants that are adapted to your soil and your climate. When you're walking, I also want you to have a look at the styles of garden that are out there. There's formal designs with straight lines and repetitive planting, or informal designs with curved paths and drifts of plants. What do you like? What looks good? Everyone is different and there's no right or wrong. I do this all the time when I go for a walk. I look at people's gardens and I think about what works, what doesn't, and what I would do to make a garden better. I'm going to share with you some photos of just houses that I've come across in my wanderings, and I'm going to walk you through what I see. Okay, so here's just some examples. Start with this one. One of the biggest design mistakes I see are people building a garden bed less than 1 metre. A narrow bed limits your planting. It's boring. A garden bed 1 metre or wider allows you to plant understory, ground covers, and gives the plants a chance to grow. These trees are sitting there going, trying to breathe in. You've got to try and make your garden beds at least 1 metre wide. Okay, so the next photo has 2 things in it that drives me nuts. There are only 2 plant heights. You have this really tall magnolia and the grasses down low. There's nothing in between. We're thinking of layering. And also the plants are just sort of sitting there on their own. When you get the plant list, you will know how wide a plant spreads. Plants don't exist in isolation out in the wild, and they're not all the same height. So I want you to think about sort of layering your plants. If this was my little patch of earth, I would prune these grasses. Now is ideal. Bring in some plants of different heights, get some ground covers in and sprawling plants. Just bring it to life. Also, pebbles are not the best mulch. Pebbles don't help plants grow. They don't give back to the soil. You can't add compost. It's really hard to plant in. The cheapest and the lowest maintenance mulch are plants. Aim to cover your soil with plants, ground covers, wildflowers. This will keep the moisture in your soil and it's habitat friendly. So the next one. So the potted garden. If you are a renter or you have a courtyard or balcony, or if you're like me and seem to accumulate pots, you might have something that looks like this. Ditch all the small pots. Restrain yourself when you go to the nursery. A large pot planted with a tree or shrub, underplanted with smaller plants or trailing ground covers will have more impact than 20 random pots and plants. Big is better, even if you have a small space. And if you're renting, look for large, lightweight fiberglass pots because you can take them with you. Okay, so last pick. If you have a tree or plant that's overgrown and you have this sort of big, massive green and you don't like it, don't pull it out. Find out what it is, look it up on the web and see what a good example of the tree looks like. Established plants in your garden ground the space and gives it structure. Give the unruly trees and shrubs a prune. Uplift the canopy and then plant the ground covers underneath. So this is what I want you to do when you go out and go for a walk. Really look at people's gardens and think about what looks good to you. That's step one. That's your warm-up. Okay, so step two, I want you to go home, sit down and have a cup of tea and have a really good look at your own garden. Figure out where you want to put your habitat garden. So, how do you know where to put it? It doesn't matter if you're planting out an existing garden bed or if you're creating a habitat garden in pots or you're starting from scratch. I want you to start small. Don't try and redesign your whole garden in one hit. Start with a small, manageable area and one that you're going to look at pretty much every day. The plants you get on this program are young. You're going to need to keep an eye on them over summer. So choose a spot that's close to your front, back door, or near your clothesline, somewhere where you're going to see it when you're coming home from work or looking out the window while you do the dishes. And near a tap is also ideal. So hopefully that kind of narrows it down for you. So you've picked your spot and now it's time to sketch your base plan. I'm going to take you through my design process and use a client's house as an example. Just remember, I'm communicating with the client, so it needs to be a little clear and a little bit fancy, but you're doing this for yourself, so only you need to understand it. So don't freak out about this drawing part and just enjoy yourself. So just share that, share the screen. So here is a simple base plan. I've got myself a measuring tape and I've measured the fence, which is this outside line. And also I've drawn the house, which is here, and I've just drawn it on a piece of paper. I've also noted where the windows are because you spend a lot of time in your house looking out in your garden. So I want to know what will I be looking at when I'm sitting in my living room. I draw my base plans to scale. So for a large area like this, I just have a ruler and 1 centimetre equals 1 metre. And if I'm drawing a single garden bed or a courtyard or balcony, 2 centimetres equals 1 metre. This is so I know how many plants I will need to fill a space. If a plant spreads to 1 metre, on my plan, I can just draw a 1 metre circle. So all I've used here is a tape measure, a pencil, a ruler, and a black pen. And if you're using the near map image as your base plan, grab some baking paper. So all I use is baking paper to trace. And then all I do is trace the home and garden and then go over it with a heavy black pen. So that's your base plan. All right, so step 3, and we are halfway, so nearly through. Okay, I'm going to recap. So you know where you want to plant your habitat garden and you've drawn your base plan. And the next step is to really look at your garden. And this is called a site analysis. And this step also involves drinking cups of tea. I want you to look at your proposed garden in the morning, at lunchtime, and in the afternoon. You're all home. Lockdown is perfect for site analysis. What I want you to take note of is the amount of sun and shade the area receives. You want to check out views, problem areas, neighbours' sheds, peeking over your fence, what's going on. I'm going to show you my site analysis for the project, so you'll get an idea of the steps that I take, but it's a little over top for what I want you to do, but it'll give you an idea, a bit of an idea of what I do with the site analysis. So this is my site analysis, and it's an exercise to think about your site. This may seem over the top, but as I work through a site analysis for a project, I begin to formulate my ideas. I start to see the shapes of garden beds, the heights of plants, and the feeling of the garden. You don't want to impose a design on a garden. Designing is about working out what the conditions of the site are and how people will use, connect, and interact with the space. So let's work through the site analysis. So the first thing I always find out is which way is north. So I've got my north pointing arrow, so north is this way. This is the east. So this is the morning sun. The client's kids' bedrooms was on the east side, and the kids were waking up sort of 5 o'clock in the morning on a summer day. So they wanted me to address this problem. So this is your morning sun, and down here is your afternoon sun. So in summer, this is your sort of hot afternoon sun. I've also marked where this sort of yellow area is the hot area, and then over here is quite a shady area. I've also marked where there's a bit of a problem area. So this is like a boggy, wet space, which they just can't quite drain, don't know what's going on. There's something to think about, whether I should, or what plants should go there, what plants like wet feet. I'm also trying to work out what the views are from the windows and from the doorway. So these little red arrows here are poor views. So this here was the neighbour's roof line, which you're looking at, and over here are good views. So a tree in your neighbour's yard or 3 neighbours over can bring something to your garden. These people have put the trampoline in front of the tree, but it was a beautiful tree, and you had the tramp sort of hiding the tree. So this is, I sort of think, well, maybe I should move that out the way. Over here was the neighbour's shed, which was abutting the back of their fence, and it was just ugly. So again, I'm just thinking maybe bring some height in there to block out that fence and improve the view. I've also labelled plants that I want to keep. I'm a big sort of supporter of trying to keep most plants. So the plants that you get on this program are very small, and you don't want to just pull everything out, because the existing plants are going to protect those young plants as they grow and give them shelter. And then as you go, in a couple of years' time, you want to shift or move the older plants and just keep an indigenous garden, then you can do that. But try and keep what you've got and work with what you've got. So these were just weeping lily-pillies, and so we're going to keep those. And this was a dead tree over here. So the kids loved playing around it, but it was dangerous. So we'll remove that. Don't throw everything out. A dead tree is perfect for this, for creating a habitat garden. You can use the branches and trunk as logs in your garden for habitat for lizards and skinks. You can leave the trunk and as a stump, and then have a water bowl on that. Or you can have balance beams for kids, or steppers through your garden, or the kids can play with make a teepee out of the branches. You can use, reuse, recycle. So I've also marked the sort of pedestrian circulation. So this kind of helps me understand where to put the garden beds, because people are going to take the direct course. And so I'll work around how they access and how they work their garden. So there's a laundry there, clothesline there, they come around here, this is the back door. And then the kids love to hide behind this dead tree and up to the trampoline. So that's my site analysis. Also, looking at your soil is really important. As Kiara was saying, the plants on this list are indigenous to your garden. So they're going to adapt very well to what your soil conditions are. My sort of theory is, if you've got sort of 3 to 5% organic matter in your soil, don't do anything. Just dig a hole, get a handful of compost, pop it in, and that'll give the plants the best start they can get. If you've got a compacted soil, you might be thinking of doing a no-dig garden, and then as it breaks down, you'll improve the condition of your soil. Drainage is another thing to consider. Digging a hole, pouring a bucket of water in there, and seeing how the water percolates through the soil is important. But again, these plants, they're right for your soil and your garden, so you shouldn't have too much problems getting them in. There's a lot of, I could go for another hour about soil, but there's a lot of really good information on the internet. ABC Gardening has some great things about gypsum, pH, but really, most of you will not have to do anything. Like Kiara said, get them in and they will grow. The other thing that I'm a big believer in and is recycling, reusing, and starting a compost heap. So compost heaps don't have to be fancy. Even just digging a hole or just putting a pile in the corner where you put all your vegetable matter and your organic matter. This is in 6 to sort of 12 months, you're going to have this beautiful, rich compost that you can dig into your soil and just build the soil. So I'm a big believer in starting a compost heap, and it's not hard to do. All right, so we're on the last step, and we're on the home straight. So the last step is drawing, and this is where, and doing your design, and this is where you grab your baking paper or trace paper, lay it over your base plan and get your ideas down. Have fun, make mistakes, be bold. It doesn't have to be pretty. A beautiful habitat garden is not a bird's eye 2D drawing. A beautiful garden is a growing, changing space. This step is about getting ideas on paper and thinking about the shapes of your garden beds and heights of plants. If you're having trouble getting your design down on paper, get out into your garden and grab your hose. Your hose? Yes, your hose. The hose is perfect. It's long and stiff enough to hold a curve. I want you to lay it on the ground and experiment with garden bed shapes. Feel what it's like to walk around a curved garden bed or down a straight path. I also get my wheelie bins out and play with shapes and height. What does the bed look like when you look through the window? You're thinking about sight lines. If you're creating a potted garden, move pots around and find balance. Think vertical as well as horizontal. Maximize your green space by installing planter boxes or tiered shelving. Hanging baskets with trailing ground covers also create vertical greenery. You don't want just a line of pots on the ground. Vertical lines in your garden, like hanging pots or tall shrubs or a birdhouse on a pole, moves the eye up and makes your space feel larger. By planting indigenous plants in pots, you are helping connect a web of green across our landscape. It's important, so don't feel like because you're in a small space or a balcony or a courtyard that you're not making a difference, that you are. I will now show you my concept plan for the garden and walk you through how I solved some of the problems that came up in the site analysis. Okay, so this is my concept and planting plan for the project. So what I was looking at was, first, we'll start here. So with just to try and alleviate the sun coming into on that easterly windows in the mornings, put up a pergola with a climbing vine over the top. This area was sort of was a bit sort of damp and dusky, so I put down some dichondra. I'm not going to go too much into the plant names. I'll just talk about shape and form and mass in this one because, and I've got this in the resource list, so it has all the plant names that I used. Over here was a tree that liked having wet feet, and plants that sort of didn't mind a bit of inundation. These plants here were the coria. So I had this sort of, which are a bit for formal planting, and corias really shape really well. So you can prune them and shape them. And I had this idea of having like almost like a cloud prune sort of row of coria. So when you looked out the window, you just had this sort of beautiful undulating line. And then grasses. This family had 2 young boys, and so they wanted to keep the lawn as a space to run around. But I've incorporated down here a little wildflower meadow. So this was quite sort of low planting. And then behind this is the taller planting, which sort of covered the fence. But this was a reserve back here, so you could still see over the fence into the trees in the distance. So here, a little wildflower meadow, and then I had this kind of little path here for the boys to sort of run behind the wildflower meadow and really immerse themselves in nature and just sort of feel like they're stepping into this wildness, this little passage of wildness. And then it tucks around here to the back of the cubby house that they had, and again it's like this little place to hide. I've got my, I put a bird bath just in front of the window near the living room, so you can just sit and look out your window and see the birds in the bird bath. A few taller trees just to up again near the side of the house, just to give it a bit of shade, but not a dense sort of canopied tree. I used the banksia. And then just down in the corner, I put the tree violet, which has a really spiky sort of branches, and I put that there because it's really important for habitat for birds, for them to feel safe. But I also wanted to keep it away from the kids, so that's tucked away to the side. yeah, so that was my design. I also moved this out a bit as well, just to, because this was quite a small space, just so they could sit at the back and have a cup of tea and just sort of enjoy the view. I'll show you a little close-up. This is a little close-up of the wildflower meadow. So if you're doing just one single garden bed, this might be what you come up with your plan. So this I did 2 centimetres equals 1 metre. Just a really simple planting. And what I'm thinking of when I'm designing a garden bed is thinking about texture, foliage shape and heights. And I put my sort of, because people are walking right around this, I'm putting my taller plants through the middle and my lower plants and ground covers and sprawling plants towards the edge. I've also put a little water bowl on a pedestal there. At home, I've just got a stump with a water bowl on it, and also a hollow log or a little log just for a bit to bring in some habitat. Some rock steppers to help you fill and change the water in the water bowl, but also finding rocks with just little dips. I'm also a collector of rocks with little dips. They'll capture the water and they can be used as a little place for insects and bees to drink out of as well. When I'm designing, I always think of, if I'm designing a natural garden or a more informal garden, I always think of planting plants in groups of 3s and 5s. Rarely do I ever just plant one plant, and never do I plant 2 plants. This is kind of, this is like the 1 metre rule of the one that don't have anything bigger than a garden bed less than 1 metre. This is just, it just looks good. And if you stick to this rule of 3s and 5s, I think you can't do any wrong. So that's the little wildflower meadow, and this is just a little elevation. So this is what I'm looking at. So different texture, different strapy. You got the dianella and the really fine grasses, and the wildflower, the little Wallenbergia down there. So it's just getting different textures, different foliage, different colour, and it leads your eye through the garden bed. Okay, so we're near the finish line. And so just to recap, I want you to go for a walk around your garden, around your neighbourhood, sorry. Drink cups of tea and observe your garden. Have a shot at drawing a base plan. And I also want you to have a crack at drawing a design and selecting some plants for your garden. I'm also very happy for you to show me photographs of the area you want to work with and images of your hose laid out. We can work with that, and just bring along what you can. And finally, I want you to have fun. The overall objective of this process is to get your plants in and start a garden. Remember, plants can be moved. Every gardener makes mistakes. In a year's time, you might look at something and think, I shouldn't have put that there. And that's okay, because you can dig it up and move it. I'm going to leave you today with 2 things, and this is my favourite quote, and I'll bring this up. And the second is a picture of a beautiful wildflower meadows here. So all the plants you see here are on the list. So have fun with your design, get your ideas down on paper, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is to get your plants in. You can make a difference, and you can make a habitat garden. And so I'm looking forward to seeing all your designs. So see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Santia, for your presentation. It was a nice way to have a little walk through garden design and different elements for people to consider, and just some little homework tasks or things to consider, I suppose, over the next 2 weeks before we see everyone. I'm just going to stop the recording, and then we'll go through and see if there's any questions that have been asked.